Welcome, everybody. My name is Olivia Allen, and I am the co-founder and vice president of strategy and advocacy at Children's Funding Project. You'll meet a bunch of different folks on this call, but it's co-hosted with Funding the Next Generation, our California affiliate, and we're excited to talk to you more about the 2024 election and lessons that we learned and the path forward for voter-approved children's funds as a tool for securing additional funding for children and youth in this country. So just a quick overview of the agenda so you know what to expect. I'm going to spend just a couple of minutes, maybe more than 2 minutes now, but I promise just a couple of minutes, telling folks who aren't quite sure what that language I'm using is, what is a voter-approved children's fund, just giving a really brief overview of that. I promise to be brief so that we can hand things over to Dan Whitaker on our team, who will introduce the 4 success stories from the November ballot that we would love to share with you. And then Margaret Brodkin, the founder of Funding the Next Generation, will share some key lessons from the election and a little bit of analysis on what she took away from the election as a lifelong advocate in this space. And then for those interested, Christina and I will spend a few minutes sharing how you can connect with us, what the opportunities are to learn more about how you could do this in your community. Dan will announce our Children's Funding Institute for 2025 and that location and how you can get involved. And then we'll stay on for about half an hour to do Q&A to answer any questions folks have that they may want to ask. So Kristen just noted this in the chat, but please go ahead and use the Q&A panel at the bottom of your screen liberally to submit questions, and we will try and get to all of those at the end. So what is a voter-approved children's fund? And Dan, I think if you hit the space bar one more time, pink dots will start populating that purple map. But a voter-approved children's fund is what we call a very specific piece of public revenue, city, county, or school district revenue, that is levied and dedicated for a purpose outside of the K-12 school day or child welfare for children and youth. So you may have heard of, in some places, that's a dedicated fund in San Antonio for pre-K. That's pre-K for SA. They have a dedicated portion of sales tax. In King County, Best Starts for Kids, King County, they have a dedicated property tax levy for cradle to career services for children and youth. In Florida, Children's Services Councils dedicate a portion of property tax for cradle to career services for children and youth. In California, there's a whole range of funds that dedicate different funding sources to different portions of the cradle to career or prenatal to adulthood spectrum. And collectively, all of these existing voter-approved children's funds, and I think we're missing one dot on this map that I can see now that I look, generate about $1.7 billion a year for kids. So we're not talking about a minimal amount of money here. Next slide, Dan. And I won't go through every point on this map, but I think a lot of people are like, local can't generate nearly as much revenue as state. Why are you working at the local level on this? And the reason local public revenue that's dedicated via ballot measure matters so much to us is in the broadest sense, because we believe it's building a movement of folks who believe in the power of government and public services to give opportunities to all kids to get a strong start in life and succeed in adulthood. So local dollars are within our locus of control, are more nimble and flexible. Public revenue moves more money than we could ever hope to move with philanthropy or other sources of funding. Dedicated because it's nice not to have to go back and ask for more money every year, and it creates sustainable improvements in programs when they can count on money to fund their programs for more than just a year at a time. And via ballot measure, because it's a chance to build a real coalition and a movement for kids in our country. Next slide, Dan. So this is just a fun slide on the history so that you know we're not making this up. 1946, the very first children's fund was established in Pinellas County, Florida, as a reaction of a juvenile court judge to the fact that there was nowhere to send kids in his community other than juvenile detention, and he wanted other opportunities and realized they needed funding to fund other opportunities for kids. And you'll see California has then, since then, dominated with the number of funds and the advocacy community there that they've been able to establish, but you'll see pockets of these all over the country. You can either call it contagious or policy diffusion. Once one community in a state does this, it makes it much easier and much more likely for other communities in the state to do this. So you'll see specifically Missouri Colorado and Florida have enabling legislation that allows localities to establish children's funds, and California has a generally a more permissive local taxing structure. Next slide, Dan. So, you'll see that this is people always ask us, is this a trend? And like, yes, kind of. There is a lot more interest in this over the past couple of decades, partly due to the advocacy work of the folks who originally got some of these funds passed, like Margaret Brodkin in San Francisco, and partly due to a changing public opinion about the value of things like early childhood services. And we're definitely in a moment of opportunity, and I've experienced a couple of those over the past decade where folks are really interested in sustaining the local investments in child and youth services that they were able to secure during COVID relief or federal relief over the past couple of years. So, Dan, I think the next slide is me handing it over to you to share more about where were voter-approved children's funds established at the ballot this fall.
Thanks, Olivia. And I'm Dan Whitaker, manager for Voter Approved Children's Funds here at Children's Funding Project. Really excited to introduce some of the great campaigns that went to the ballot this past year. Saw a lot of success in November, and as you can see, dedicating a significant amount of revenue to children and youth across the country. So today we're joined by Jesus Sanchez from Pomona, California, who was integral in leading the Pomona Measure Y campaign. Kathy McCourse from Travis County, Texas. Proposition A there passed in November as well. Dennis Meyer from Platte County, Missouri, establishing a new Children's Services Fund there. And Ananda Sweet will be joining us from Sonoma County, California. And with that, I'm going to pass it on over to Jesus to talk about Pomona Measure Y and what they did there.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jesus Sanchez. I'm here representing Gente Organizada and Pomona, California, which we are in the eastern edge of Los Angeles County. And a little bit of background. So the name of our campaign was the Pomona Kids First Initiative, or Pomona Kids First campaign. And eventually when we grew up and we were able to get our letter and Measure Y as voters knew it. So a little bit about Measure Y. We set out and developed policy that amended the city of Pomona's charter to create a fund for children and youth. What this did was create a budget, what we call a set aside of the city's general fund, to provide increased and dedicated funding for programs and services that address the needs of children, youth, and young adults. A bit of the numbers. This is going to increase yearly until it hits 10% of the general fund in 2030-31. And the initiative is also going to create a Department of Children and Youth that's going to administer the fund. So also looking at the hall and changing the infrastructure of our city to be able to do this correctly. So it's a little bit of background. Some of the statistics about our campaign. This was not a new idea that came out of the blue. There was 8 years of grassroots organizing behind this, 3 years of electoral campaigning for Pomona Kids First. We attempted to get this ballot initiative or idea on the ballot 2 years prior and came up short. We were humbled and we had to re-strategize and pivot. We engaged over 25,000 Pomona residents in the signature gathering process. So we took advantage of laws here in California that allow for community members to collect enough signatures of registered voters in the city to get this on the ballot. 18,000 total signatures were collected, 13,000 of which were valid from Pomona voters in support of the initiative appearing on the ballot. And we also successfully completed a validation process through the county and the city to finally appear on the November ballot. This also took a lot of work in terms of resourcing this work. So we were able to fundraise over $300,000 to resource our Get Out the Vote program. We made roughly 20,000 calls to Pomona voters, knocked and flyered roughly 15,000 homes, and ultimately received 62% of the vote on election day, which amounted to over 24,000 yes votes. Our projection in terms of impact that this is going to generate 15 to $20 million annually at its peak for youth services. And this was a kind of a big deal for us in terms of our messaging and on the campaign trail. I'm going to talk about kind of some of the opposition we were up against, but initially there was a lot of pushback from some of the folks that were opposed to this and trying to portray this campaign as a how are we going to spend 10% of our budget on, recreation and arts and crafts? Like, this is just going to be somebody rolling out a basketball or, painting supplies at a rec center. And it's just going to be a just misuse of so much tax dollars. And we had to do a lot of community education in terms of the scope of what was possible in terms of programmatic activities and services for community members. So when we wrote this policy, this was very expansive. We obviously want more arts, sports, recreation, outdoor activities for young people. They need that. But this also included housing. This also included violence prevention, addressing domestic violence in our community, and also looked at how we're going to leverage these resources to impact the overall health and well-being of our folks. So looking at everything kind of just holistically. So that was something that was key for us in the way this was written, to be able to have just that expensive, I guess, if you will, like menu list of potential programs and services to offer. A little bit about how we pull this off, our people. I mentioned to you all that this was an 8-year effort. This was a community-driven campaign. So at Gente Organizada, we do intergenerational community organizing, and we're youth-led from our board to our staff. And this campaign was no different. So Gente Organizada, the 501c3 nonprofit, we incubated this campaign. And for compliance reasons, we were able to endorse it, but we couldn't run the day-to-day operations of the ballot initiative. And we were able to develop leadership within the C3 to go out and start this campaign committee and run this campaign. And this was truly a grassroots campaign that majority of young people were involved, from our steering committee to helping write policy to making strategic decisions around strategy and resource allocation, to the folks that were on the ground, knocking doors, making calls, meeting with influential folks, city officials. So really just every time I do this, give kudos and the flowers to a lot of our young folks in our community that push this. I'm going to tell a little bit more of the story of what we were up against, so just to kind of paint the picture. But this was truly grassroots, and we had a small but mighty coalition of community leaders and nonprofits. So it was Gente Organizada, the Pomona Valley Pride Center, and Just Us for Youth, which are some other community-based organizations that do really critical work and are trusted in our community. Now, those were the folks who pushed for it. Now, who were the villains? Who were we up against? And we named them. And we were up against the establishment. We had an organized opposition campaign. The entire Pomona City Council was against us. Unfortunately, too, with the polarizing nature of elections, we had a lot of affluent white residents in our community that were mobilizing against this. That made this campaign very polarizing as well for some. Valley Vista Services, which is a waste management company and has a lot of influence, the LA County Democratic Party, and also the Pomona Valley Democratic Party, police union, and also local newspapers, and the region's largest newspaper was up against this. And we even faced some labor opposition. Um, this, when we were in the campaign, was a very intense kind of mountain to climb, but we went along with it as best as we could in terms of talking to residents and really just leaning into the facts of this in terms of we're community members that live here going up against very powerful, influential people and organizations. And this is why we're doing it. We don't believe in how they're spending our funds and allocating our funds. And we want you to get behind us. And a lot of that messaging really resonated with voters. That kind of just was backed by the outcome here. So lastly, just to kind of wrap up, I think I did good with time here. Um, we won, and these were kind of the results here. We were able to secure 62% of the vote. 24,000 voters voted for this, 14,000 against. And what is next? We are in the middle of implementation, and some really good news to share with folks. At the last city council meeting, the city staff, city manager, and mayor, city council moved on the first step of implementation of this new law that our city has by creating the fund and doing its first allocation towards the fund. We, with the support of Funding the Next Generation, we're checking their math, and we're reviewing to see if that initial deposit of, I think it was almost 1.6 or 1.7 million dollars, is in fact accurate. So that's it for now. I do want to also just acknowledge just the different partners here today and how much support they were in getting us going here. So the Children's Funding Project and Margaret Brodkin and Funding the Next Generation, like we couldn't have done it without that network and support. So yeah, that's a little bit from us in Pomona, California. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jesus, for sharing your story. And yeah, I think it's a really cool example. You'll see that these campaigns can be led from many different places, but this is a prime example of a youth-led, really centered in a campaign that was centered in youth perspective. So, and I think it had a big played a big role in their ability to win by such a large margin as well. So thank you, Jesus. And with that, we're gonna move on across the country to Travis County, Texas, where Affordable Childcare Now led an effort for Travis County Prop A and introduce Kathy McHorse, who I've had the pleasure of working with quite a bit over the past couple years, who was their coalition manager on their campaign. So Kathy, I'll send it over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Dan. It was interesting listening and comparing and contrasting our experience with that in Pomona. As Dan said, my name is Kathy McHorse. I was the coalition manager for the community-wide coalition, Affordable Childcare Now, and we had Travis County Prop A, so the other end of the alphabet here in Travis County. And if you're not familiar with Texas geography, Travis County surrounds the city of Austin, which is the capital of Texas. A little bit about our ballot measure. It was a 2.5 cent property tax rate increase in our community. Texas has very limited authority to generate new revenue. This property tax rate election was 2.5 cents per $100 valuation, which equates to about $10 a month or $125 a year for the average homeowner in Travis County. The purpose of the funding was to expand availability of early childhood and after school high quality childcare. It was not only increasing access to this affordable and high quality care and after school and summer programming, it creates new slots as well as incorporating investments in quality and capacity building, family child care, non-traditional hour care, and after school and the after school and summer programs in non-traditional hour care. We anticipate up to 10,000 children impacted annually. And this funding will be administered by the county. The county is adding staff members who will then procure for administrators from the community who will actually deliver the services. So it'll be a procurement process. We're not creating a new department in the Travis County government. Again, Texas tends to be a small government state. So the Health and Human Services Department will administer the funding, and the county commissioners will have oversight. And we will have a community advisory board that will inform and provide ongoing community input and oversight for the funding. How did we get here? We have a long-standing early childhood coalition in Travis County. It's the Success by Six coalition that had been very active in advocacy and strategic planning in our community, active since about 2012 in advocating for high-quality childcare and early childhood education. In 2021, 2022, the coalition had advocated successfully to get about $15 million in COVID relief funds for the childcare sector in our community. And as part of that process and reporting back to both the city of Austin and Travis County, several of our city council members asked, what happens next when these funds expire, absent federal or state action? What's going to happen next? And we explained as part of that coalition work that one opportunity would be to explore dedicated local funding. And that was the beginning of our engagement with the Children's Funding Project. We're able to hire a strategic finance coordinator with some support, got training from Children's Funding Project, and really helped us map out how much money did we need to serve our community more effectively, and did some fiscal mapping or looking at what were all the dollars that we had available. And that helped us come up with a cost of quality and the analysis we needed to identify how much funding would you truly need in our community. Once that work was done, we pulled together a cohort to be part of work with the Children's Funding Project and begin considering if we were able to get on a path towards a ballot initiative. Unlike Pomona, we did not pursue a petition and signatures. We actually secured the support of our Travis County commissioners to put this on the ballot last summer. We had originally started down the path with our city, but as I mentioned, Travis County is a community that rings around the city of Austin, and we have the circumstances where a lot of families are moving out of the city. This is one of the challenges of our ballot measure, was deciding, were we going to pursue a ballot measure through the city of Austin and ask our city council to place it on the ballot, or to pursue Travis County commissioners. We had cultivated more champions at the city. And so this was one of the things we really had to wrestle with. Ultimately, our Travis County commissioners, after 3 separate meetings and presentations, did unanimously vote to put it on the ballot. And we were able to have a great kickoff to the campaign series with our city council members, our mayor, and our county commissioners all joining together to talk about the kickoff. We had a very broad coalition. One of the negotiations as we moved from city towards the county was our county commissioners really wanted to see what started out as an early childhood childcare initiative to also adopt and incorporate efforts to fund after school and summer programs in our community. And there were some negotiations to do that, increasing the amount of tax rate that we were discussing, but ultimately it helped us create a very broad coalition, not only of kind of the organizations working in the early childhood space, but those after school and summer program space. And that coalition also incorporated a lot of business leaders, our unions, the Democratic Party, and we were very successful in acquiring lots of endorsements within our community. We launched our campaign. We actually hired our campaign consultants in January of 2024 to help with our process for getting on the ballot. And then we formally launched our campaign in September of 2024. As I mentioned, we were fortunate to build a really big and robust coalition. Some of that was having a lot of individual meetings with influencers on our community to explain to them what this initiative would do and what the long-term impact would be in our community. Let's see. We did not have any formal opposition, which was very fortunate. I think part of the groundwork that we did from January on, communicating with different constituencies in our community. However, we did have a lot of tax sensitivity in the community, as well as we had our local school district also had a tax rate election on the ballot. So that was challenging for us, but we were fortunate that we didn't actually have formal opposition. Some things we learned from this process was really, we spent a lot of time in that conversation about city or county, and then took a lot of time to cultivate the success with our county commissioners. And another thing that was super helpful in our process was having our Democratic Party involved and really engaged. They provided a lot of boots on the ground support with our canvassing, our phone banking, carrying our lit, etc. Yeah, so we were very fortunate to have a wide margin of success, almost 60% to about 40%. And right now, our Travis County is in the process of hiring staff and conducting further community engagement to further inform our planning and implementation process.
Thanks so much, Kathy. Yeah, so it's a great story, and really want to highlight all the amazing work that they did to really broaden their coalition and socialize this throughout the community to build that large base of support. So thanks again for sharing, Kathy. And now moving a little bit north to Missouri, where in Platte County, a small group of advocates was able to successfully pass a levy that supports a new children's services fund. And to talk about that a bit is Dennis Meyer, who played a huge role in getting it off the ground and taking over the finish line. So I'll pass it over to you, Dennis.
Yeah, Dennis Meyer. I'm the co-executive director at Synergy Services, an agency here in the Kansas City area. And so we are one of now, I think, 12 counties in the state of Missouri that has successfully passed and implemented a children's services fund. I'll talk a little bit later about the challenges that we still have, even though we've successfully passed it. So this is a quarter of a cent that can be levied either from a property tax or a sales tax, and in most counties, the tax is a sales tax, and it pays for 9 different categories of services, and those definitions of categories that you see on the screen are in fact part of the statute. And so it's a pretty well prescribed statute as to how this money is to be used. And in every instance, it must be distributed or administered by a volunteer board of 9 members that the county commissioners or county leadership council can appoint. We approached the commissioners about this time last year, and we live in an area, Kansas City has 2 counties that already have the Children's Services Fund tax, and we led the charge in Jackson County after talking to folks on the eastern side of the state and getting to know the success and the impact of this funding. So in 2015, I believe, it passed in Jackson County, and the city council insisted that they would allow it to be on the ballot if we had a 7-year sunset. So we agreed to that, and so it passed in 2015, and then it passed again in 22, and it passed by something like 78%. It was phenomenally successful the second time around. In 2017, a coalition of agencies led the charge in Clay County, which is just to the north of Kansas City, and it was first rejected by the commissioners, and then in that county, literally by purely a political maneuver on our part, I happen to know one of the developers really well for the county, and when it got stalled out, he essentially invited each of the commissioners to coffee and said, "Hey guys, let's not make this difficult for these people. They want the right thing, and you should put them on the ballot." It's about the only time that those three commissioners agreed to anything, and each three voted to put us on the ballot. We won it in Clay County in 17 by 67 votes, and they raise about 12 to 13 million a year in that county. And if you count all the kids who are impacted by the prevention services and the kids who are impacted by services like emergency shelter, transitional living, counseling, and so forth, their 2023 report said that about 15,000 kids were impacted by that money. So it has been put to good use. So we thought, well, let's do this in Platte County. The commissioners fought really hard to keep us off the ballot because they wanted to pass a jail expansion tax. And so we tried to work with them, but they finally said, we'll never put you on the ballot. You'll have to collect signatures. So we collected about 8,400 signatures. We contracted with a signature collecting company, it was a really smart move. They helped us with that whole process. And I think the collection was probably 6 weeks long. So to collect 8,400 signatures in that short amount of time was um, was incredible. And then we needed 4,500 of them to be valid, and 5,700 were valid. So when those were validated, that letter went to the commissioners, and the commissioners essentially said, well, that's great, but we're simply not doing it. And so we ended up having to file a lawsuit against the commission and the Board of Elections. And the judge said that the Board of Elections had to put us on the ballot, which is how we got on the ballot in August. And then at the election, November 5th, the initiative was passed by over 7,000 votes, 56% vote margin. So we were really pleased about that, and thought we had been successful. We were, obviously. The the election results were certified and sent to the Secretary of State. And in December, the commissioners passed an ordinance to essentially admit, or to say, agree that the initiative that the Children's Services Fund indeed was established. However, they would refuse to allow the tax to be levied in the county because they felt like it was in the county's best interest. So you could imagine the feedback from the voters, and We are literally now this, in these weeks in the middle of trying to see if the Department of Revenue will essentially follow the state laws or statutes that will start collecting the tax, whether the commissioners will allow that or not. And it may end up being litigated, but we feel like we have a pretty strong case. Um, we got there by forming a steering committee, and my advice would be, or the lessons learned, is that we had a really good consultant who in Missouri. Todd Patterson has been helpful for most of the counties who's passed this, and he helped us get off the ground, although he knew that we had done this in two other counties, so we kind of knew our way around. But we started with a small steering committee and then grew a coalition of about 80 maybe members. And we had invited and it was kind of expected that if you were on the coalition, you would probably also be asked to donate some to cover the campaign costs. The campaign costs were under 200,000, and about 100 of that was signature collection. And then, of course, we ended up about 30,000 for legal fees when we had to take the Board of Elections to court. The Yeah, so the lessons I think that I would the takeaways are it can be expensive, although it would have been a lot less expensive had the um, commissioners put this on the ballot for us. And the second lesson, I think, was that we had built a really strong need statement and a case and we stuck by that. We did not get into, and there was a lot of opposition, saying that this money would be used for transgender surgery and on and on. I mean, the opposition spent probably 100,000 to try to keep this from succeeding. And I think the community, quite frankly, believed us because we stayed with the message, kept it really simple, and stayed on the message that it was about kids. And they understood what other counties in our area had benefited or how they had benefited. And I believe that most of the people in this county kind of wanted the same. Um, just one last word, I guess. These funds in most counties right now, I think, are split probably close to at least 70-30, where 70% is going for emergency services and counseling and so forth, and probably at least 30-40 is spent on prevention and early intervention services. And we feel like we would not be able to fund hardly any prevention services were it not for these Children's Services Fund kind of money. So yeah, I'll leave it there. I hope I've touched on most of the key points, and then I'll be around for question and answer.
Thanks so much, Dennis. Their story is kind of a story of a scrappy campaign in an area with some slightly different demographics than some of the other campaigns that we've seen. So congratulations on your success, and knowing that you still have an ongoing fight, we'll be watching that closely. Now moving on to our last but not least campaign that passed out of Sonoma County, sales tax supporting early childhood measures. I'm going to pass it to Ananda Sweet, who was integral in passing this measure. She is the CEO of the Santa Rosa Metro Chamber. So Ananda, go ahead.
Thanks so much, Dan. Yeah, thrilled to be here and share with you about our success and our big win in November. So again, Ananda Sweet, my day job, I'm the CEO of the Santa Rosa Metro Chamber of Commerce. And then as far as the campaign, I am the president of Our Kids, Our Future, the 501c4 organization that we stood up to lead this effort. And then I'm the chair of the political action committee that we are about to shut down because we were successful in November. So Measure I was a quarter-cent sales tax countywide. Sonoma County, for some context, is a population of just under 500,000 people. We are in Northern California in the North Bay. The county seat, the city of Santa Rosa, has just under 200,000 people, and it is the largest city, even as a mid-sized city, from the Golden Gate Bridge to the Oregon border in California. So looking at sort of sales tax and how we got to where we are now, this conversation, I would say, was going on for well over a decade of really, right, how do we fund this critical need of serving young children and their families in Sonoma County and looking at a dedicated public funding source. I sat on my first committee looking at this 8 years ago. And at that time we were looking at soda taxes and what could possibly be the different iterations of public funding generation resources. Time after time through those conversations, right, for the soda tax example, we learned that the soda tax lobby would come after us like really hard with a publicly, right, strongly funded opposition campaign. We had some concerns around going with a sales tax, right? There's of course concerns around sales tax for some conservative circles. There's certainly concerns around the nature and understanding of the sales tax being regressive. So we're battling some of that. And really, we did polling after polling through those years, and we just weren't close enough to hit a 2/3 threshold. So one of the key factors for us was the change in the way that California citizens petitions could move an initiative forward. And so going from a required supermajority and a change in that interpretation of needing a 2/3 pass rate to interpret that as really only applying to initiatives put on by elected officials or lawmakers. And so as a citizens initiative, suddenly we had this opportunity to pass at a simple majority or 50% plus one vote. So as a combination of all of that, looking at our polling data, knowing that we were consistently over that simple majority, we also are a community that had been through pre-pandemic crisis after crisis. So we had the Tubbs fire, some of you may remember, in national news, which at the time was the largest natural fire in history. It's unfortunately been surpassed many times, right, including what's going on currently in LA. But at the time, that had a huge impact on access to childcare, from direct loss of slots to schools closing down because of fire impact, smoke, air quality, those kinds of things. So that we sort of went through this period of fire, flood, pandemic. And so we were also at a place where there was a broader community understanding of the need for access to childcare and really the impact on children and young families when teachers couldn't afford to stay in the profession, facilities were shutting down because owners of childcare centers couldn't afford to stay in business if they suddenly needed a new roof or had some kind of impact. And so for multiple reasons, but those are some key ones, the time was right to move forward for us. So currently a quarter-cent sales tax brings $30 million a year. We named First Five Sonoma County as an administrator of the tax. Just as a note, we would not have had the public support to have our county lead the tax. There just isn't a trust in our county for how they're using some current other tax funding. There is no sunset, and that is not something that we would have gone with. It polled stronger with no sunset. So it is worded as until ended with voters. So this is $30 million a year unless put back on the ballot by voters. We could be successful with that because there's no opposition. I'll just note, if we had opposition, it might have been a different decision. And then we needed about 23,000 signatures to qualify. And so again, because we did this with the simple majority goal, we did have to put it on as a citizens initiative. And we got 29,000 signatures, so qualified easily. We did, I'll say easily, although it was our second attempt. So I'll get back to that at the end if there's some time. So we initially planned to be on the ballot in 2022, and we were on in November of 2024. Our total budget, just for some context there too, was $800,000, and about $325 is what we had to spend to qualify. So largely on the signature gathering piece, and then about $425,000 on the campaign itself. To speak a little bit about what the measure will do. So 60% is focused on expanding access to quality early childhood education and care, and then 40% focused on children's health and mental health. And I'll say that coming to this of really these sort of system level challenges that we were seeing for young children and their families and access to care. These were the challenges that we were seeing, and also that community awareness that I mentioned from crisis after crisis was just a little bit different in our community. There was a broader understanding of like inequity, and equity actually polled after crisis. Equity was a high polling issue for us locally when you talk about childcare. Teacher pay was something that it showed up in the polling, was suddenly a broader awareness too. So we were in this place where public understanding of sort of the systemic level challenges here locally. So the polling piece, and then what we knew right from the data and from our local nonprofit providers and from our local early childhood care experts were really the systemic level challenges that we could hit to make a big difference in this area. So that all of that aligned with what the voters understood, and so that's how we landed on sort of these goals. And then next slide, please. So key factors of success for our measure. Again, I talked about a little bit about the issues, solutions resonating with our community. One thing that I talk about anytime I talk about our success is the group that we put together really to guide this effort, and our kitchen cabinet really was a really great group of cross-sector influential leaders, right? So we had business at the table with myself there as the chamber CEO. We had labor at the table. We had a philanthropist at the table. We had someone who was really focused on housing policy advocacy at the table. And because of, I think, the group that we had a local nonprofit ED who also leads all of the Head Start programs in our community. So we had really expertise at that table, but also connections and relationships. And so we were really able to leverage that and have really honest conversations with each other. We were able to create a space where we could say anything in that meeting, and I had complete trust that it would stay within that meeting when that was needed. But I mean, really, it was just, we would sit down, we met weekly, and we would sit down as we're thinking about, okay, how do we make sure we get everybody on board with this? How do we really build this, right, the citizens initiative with real cross-sector support? And so between us, we could sit down with one meeting was focused on elected officials. We would sit down and go, okay, who has a direct tie to all these elected officials, from the immediate local city, county level to state level to federal level, who has the best connection? If one of us wasn't directly connected where we could pick up the phone ourselves, it was okay, well, who has 1 degree of separation where you have that person you can call who can make the call? And so, I mean, that level of grassroots of like sitting down with a Google spreadsheet and going through and assigning out tasks, and then the next meeting coming back together. So we were all really dedicated to doing that, and doing that each week. But I think that was really key to the fact that we didn't have any opposition, and that we had such a strong, again, cross-sector support beyond our committee itself. So we ended up with every elected official that touched our county from a federal to local level supporting the measure with no opposition. Similarly with nonprofits, business groups, organizations, we had entities endorsing our measure that had never been on the same endorsement list before, right? From a more like maybe progressive group to a conservative business group, and 2 of those on our list had both never endorsed a sales tax with no sunset before, and both were right on our list of endorsers. So I think again, having that group that really understood, that was really connected across the community, sort of really understood the issue from our own lens. And so I, as the chamber, wasn't always the right person to go talk to every group, although I did a lot of our presentations. Right, we all sort of understood, right, we would all start with this foundation of every child deserves, right, the start they need to be successful in life. But then from there, right, we could tailor those conversations based on what we knew that entity cared about, from right equity to economic and workforce development, right, to the range of issues that we knew each group cared about. We were able to leverage strong support from right Margaret Brodkin, the Children's Funding Accelerator. Right, so these national efforts, being able to be a piece of that was certainly helpful, and we used a lot of that, a lot of those resources. And then from just a funding perspective, right, having the money to run a strong campaign was really important for us. So from both those types of resources, but also locally. Our local community foundation, most of those presentations I mentioned, right, include a financial ask. And so we were able to, raise the money to run a strong campaign. As I mentioned, we had no organized opposition. And a lot of that, I think, does come back again to that small group of that kitchen cabinet that met weekly. And we could really head things off and make a plan for, okay, who's the best person to neutralize this potential thing. And right, so with the Taxpayers Association, we happened to have two of us that were appropriate for that, because one of the members had been a school board member, and she actually successfully got them to not oppose a school taxes, which was probably the only time that had happened, right, by making the case of the economic investment in our community. And I had all the data I had put together for businesses around the economic and workforce development issue of access to childcare. And so together, right, with all of that, we were able to get the Taxpayers Association to stay neutral, which they never do locally on a tax issue. I think that's probably good for that slide. I'm running out of time. So, okay, so just a couple other things I'll say is really foundationally just setting ourselves up for success, getting expert legal advice, right, making sure that our ballot language could not be called into question, right, that everything was well done in that front. And then the lesson that we learned the hard way, I would say, is making sure that we the signature gathering firm, we had some challenges with the first time that I can talk about more maybe sometime when we have more time, but really went with the most reputable, right, best respected, successful signature gathering firm, attorneys that were fantastic, really thoroughly vetted consultants, and were really thoughtful about who we were going to work with as our campaign consultants. And then I will stop talking because I think I'm over time.
Great. Thanks so much, Ananda. Appreciate you sharing your story. And a big thank you to all of our panelists for coming here to take time out of their day to share their full campaign story. So with that, you've heard her name a few times already mentioned, but I'm going to send it over to Margaret Borodkin. She's the founder of Funding the Next Generation, has been doing this work for a long time, and it contributes so much of her knowledge and experience to continuing this movement. But she's going to share some takeaways from the 2024 election.
Let me share most of them in the questions afterwards, because we have some important things to get to. These were fantastic campaigns. It is amazing you can win in Missouri. In California, it was 62%. They were amazing. They were bold. They learned everything we had to say and ran excellent campaigns. And you should know that we want to help anybody who's online do the kinds of things they did. The one thing I'll say from this slide, and we can talk about the other parts later, which is it took all of these places many years to build the capacity and build the momentum. I started going to Sonoma 12 years ago, Ananda, with a group of people who wanted to do this. I met Jesus in 2018, started talking about it. So this is not something that happens overnight, but you have a lot of successes along the way. So that is, important. In terms of the fundraising, if there are funders online, you should know that a lot of this early work, which is critical, can be funded through foundations, through community foundations. We have, through Children's Funding Project and Heising Simons Foundation, are able to help people, but this costs money, and there are ways to get the money, and we help people with that. The last thing I want to say is that luck does matter. And we can go on to the next slide. You have to do this because you're doing more than just passing a measure. You're building capacity. You're strengthening the institutions of democracy. You're engaging people. You may not win the first time. You can win the second time. In Sacramento, it took 3 times. So, luck. In California, we had 2 almost identical campaigns in 2022. They both lost through no fault of the campaigns. So, things happen that you can't always plan for. I just want to say, because I love this slide and I won't go through it, but, we had two in California and the other two, really different kinds of campaigns. They were fabulous campaigns that had leadership, but we had this wonderful thing in Sonoma with the Chamber of Commerce, with everybody and their uncle involved, with billboards on the highways with pictures of beautiful kids. It's all of our job to get this done and help our kids. And we had one kick-ass campaign in Pomona, and it got out more Latino voters than I think any place else in the state. And it was all about, we're not doing right by our kids. We're pissed off about it. We're spending all our money on the police. We need to invest in people. And damn, they got 62% of the vote because it was a true grassroots campaign and they got people out. So we should talk more about this during questions. There are a lot more issues.
Yeah, Dan, if you could move this slide on quickly. Before we reach the 1 hour mark, thanks to folks who've stuck around, but we just want to briefly touch on, if you're interested in learning about whether or not you can do this in your community, if you're in California, Funding the Next Generation is the place to go. And Margaret Brodkin and Christina Gilbert, who are both on this call, and you'll hear from them during the Q&A section, are the people to go to. Children's Funding Project, we have a cohort for folks who are trying to do this outside of California. And Dan is going to announce a great first step, and a step that all these folks, well, 3 out of 4 of these campaigns took, was to go to the Children's Funding Institute. So I'll let Dan announce where that's going to be this year.
Yeah, like Olivia said, we're happy to announce that our 2025 Children's Funding Institute will be held in June, the first week in June, 3rd through the 5th, in King County, Seattle, Washington, where Best Starts for Kids is a voter-approved children's fund there, supporting kids from birth all the way from cradle to career. Admission to the Institute is free for anybody that it's appropriate for. Attendees are just responsible for travel and lodging. If you want more information, please reach out to me at our Institute email address. Happy to meet one-on-one and talk with you all more about that.
Fill out the interest form first. I'd say we're
Yes.
directing people to fill
Yes,
out
sorry.
the interest form. If you're interested in talking to Christina and Margaret, if you're interested in talking to Dan and I, if you're interested in the Institute, and if you're interested, we'd really encourage you to fill that out, because we're trying to get a sense of all the logistical numbers that we need. So I know Kristen has dropped that in the chat, the interest form. Please fill it out. We will follow up ASAP. Dan's putting up on the screen some of the facts from past institutes, folks who've attended, how much they generate annually. And please go ahead and submit more Q&A, more questions, and we'll get to answering those in a second. Christina, anything you want to say about the interest form or reaching out to you or the Institute?
No, the only thing I would add is, if you are in California, we are having a statewide convening on March 5th. So if you fill out the interest form, we'll also be able to send you information on that. And that's really just an opportunity to come learn more about Funding the Next Generation, what we've accomplished, where we plan to go, and how we can help you. And then we'll also help connect you to the institute that we work with CFP on.
Great. And someone asked in the Q&A how long the interest form will be available. I think we're going to leave it up kind of in perpetuity, but for the purposes of the Institute, the interest form will be up. The interest form really just gives us a sense of who to send the registration invite to, and who to get in touch with about whether they should register. We'd like to have spoken to people before they register to make sure it's a good fit for them, and to keep the group the right size. But if you're interested, I think we'll be keeping that interest form open for reaching out to Christina and Margaret or Dan and I for a long time. If you could fill it out if you're interested in the Institute specifically, that would be awesome.
And one more thing, Olivia, I want people to appreciate how much fun this is, how exciting it is to actually get involved in a campaign, to be able to put something on the ballot, to be able to organize the visibility of your issues. And so I don't think we should sort of let this opportunity pass without really saying this is an exciting opportunity to mobilize, to get attention, and to sort of build the capacity of our field and of our goals.